My name is Daleen Magsam. I'm a special education consultant with the Easter Seals Outreach Program and Technology Services team. Today, we're going to talk about setting up your classroom. This is where we're headed today in relation to classroom setup. As we go through this training, you may find it helpful to jot down notes or ideas that come to you as we talk. Our goal for you is that once you've completed this training, you will have the information you need to set up your classroom in a way that meets your students' individual needs and create systems for organization that promote structure, predictability, and routine for the students and staff in your classroom. So we're going to talk about the benefits of setting up your classroom. We're going to define and suggest some zones, provide examples with tips and tricks, and we'll explore some resources and tools that we hope you'll find helpful. So first of all, the benefits. One of the most important benefits is that we maximize instructional time when things are set up and ready to go, because we don't spend that time looking for materials during instruction, and that increases the impact on students, which is our goal as educators. So just in a nutshell, you can see the bullets on the screen. It provides predictability and routine for everyone, not just for your students, but for you as the teacher and for any other staff that may be in your room. We've talked about protecting instructional time. That's a biggie. It increases independence and safety for your students. And then everyone can find the materials easily. So it's going to make your job so much easier when everyone knows where things are and where they go. And I love that little saying, don't wish for it, work for it. I always say that you're going to spend the time either way. Whether you're organized, you're going to spend the time on the front end doing that, getting organized, setting things up for success, or you'll spend the time throughout the school year every day trying to stay on top of things and trying to get organized. And it seems like it's a constant struggle. So one way or the other, you're going to spend the time. I often find it helpful to do it on the front end, or push pause in the middle of the year and get organized so that the rest of your year goes well. So really, organization is the key. Before you can set up your classroom, it's helpful to declutter and organize your materials. So here is just a little bit of advice. I don't know if you've heard of Marie Kondo, but she's a famous organizer. And she would say you should keep it. I think she just says keep, trash, or donate. We've included relocate because sometimes it may be material that someone else can use. It just needs to be, maybe it needs to be shared with a teacher down the hall or a different teacher in the district who can use that material. And then one little caveat is always ask before you trash or donate supplies or curriculum that have been purchased by your school or your district. That's a really important little note. Things to think about, either trashing, donated, or relocating, are things that you have multiples of. Maybe you have, way more math manipulatives than your small class will ever use. So you could talk to someone in your building. Maybe you have a math coach or someone that you could visit with and see if you can spread those supplies out to places where they could be used. And things that you haven't used in the last 3 or so years, consider getting rid of it. And then if it's not age appropriate for your students, it's a good item to find a new home for. If you Google decluttering a classroom, you can find some really helpful resources and some things that are kind of fun, some fun ideas for getting organized and decluttering. Next, we're going to talk about zones in a classroom. So what do I mean when I'm talking about a zone? A zone is just a clearly defined area in your classroom that's intended for a specific purpose, and students rotate through those zones during a school day. Sometimes people refer to them as stations or centers in a classroom. And often you're going to have zones that are multi-purpose, that serve more than one purpose. And we'll call out some of those possibilities as we go through today. But you can see on the screen, I'm going to start in the top left corner and work my way around that room. But you can see a PRT area, a computer area, which that might be something like students work independently at those stations. Maybe they're working on TeachTown, or maybe they're working on a different computer curriculum that might be in the room. Then you also see on the left-hand side, you see a teacher area. It's kind of in the middle between, you've got the door and the cubbies, kind of at the bottom of the picture. Then you've got a teacher area when you come in, and it's kind of smashed in between that entry area and the PRT area. I'd like to point out that that teacher area doesn't take up a lot of space in this classroom. As you go around, you can see that you have a social or choice area on the floor there that might not be needed in every classroom. It's just an example in this picture. On the far right top corner, you can see some work areas. Maybe that's an independent station, or maybe that's where a staff works one-on-one with a student. And there are a couple of work areas there that maybe those are multi-purpose work areas. They look like they would make great independent workstations for students. Then in the center, you have that kind of horseshoe-shaped table, which is clearly where a teacher would teach small group. And then you have a calendar and a circle area there on the carpet. That's usually more common in an elementary classroom, but we'll talk a little bit about what that might look like in a secondary classroom as we go through today as well. So that's just an example to show you how a classroom could be separated into zones or stations. If you've ever had a difficult classroom, a giant classroom that was difficult to divide into smaller areas, this may speak to you. You'll know that it was next to impossible to teach students who are super active sensory seekers in that kind of an environment where it's big and it's hard to break up. So this was my classroom several years ago. There's so much about this picture that I could say, but the takeaway that I want to leave you with is I didn't know what I didn't know. There were several barriers in this classroom. It really was a nightmare for me. I had several little young students with autism that year. I had been given this great big classroom that I hadn't had before, and I was trying to separate it up into smaller areas, but it was really difficult in this space. So you can see some evidence that I'm trying to do the right things. Over on the far left, there are some dividers. There's that big wooden study carrel in the middle that I was trying to use to divide up the room a little bit. But do you know what happened with that? It just became an obstacle course for students to run around and hide underneath. There was like a desk on one side and they would like get in there and hide. What I did like about it though, was that I could put my visual schedules on it and they were in a central area of the room. So you can see that I've got visual schedules in place. I'm trying to run that in this classroom. I've got different small group areas going where staff can teach students in small groups. And so I was working really hard, but the reality was that I was chasing 7 little guys around this classroom every day. And they were much quicker than I was at skirting between those tables. And so you can see that how this furniture might have just become an obstacle course for those students. And they were, like I said, they were quicker at getting around it than I was. You can also see back in the far right corner, there's a shelf that I could have used as a divider. If I would have used that a little better, it might have been helpful for me. I didn't use it correctly in this picture. It's kind of just set back there instead of out in the middle somewhere where it could maybe divide up a section of the room. There are some, you can see those little plastic drawers next to a couple of the stations. I was trying to organize my materials and have things ready for myself and my para to use, but I was failing every single day. And it was because of 2 reasons. I didn't know what I didn't know, and the room wasn't set up in a way to help me. So I needed support and someone to show me what I didn't know. And thankfully, I had an amazing mentor in my district who was able to come in and support me and help me get my classroom where it needed to be. So I ended up moving out of this classroom. The district needed it for a kindergarten classroom anyway. They moved me upstairs to a much smaller room that worked much better for my needs. And I'm going to show you the smaller room in just a second. So think about this room, all the things that are going on, everything I was trying to do, but it clearly was not working, was not an environment where teaching and learning were successfully occurring. And I desperately wanted that to happen, but I wasn't sure how. So keep that in mind. And here is an example of my new classroom. So this was not all me, and it did not all happen overnight. I had a lot of help and support to get here. But you can see that now there's furniture being used to divide up the classroom, successfully divide up the classroom. There are some areas of the room that you can see. You can identify the whole group area, some small group areas. There's a one-on-one area back in that top right corner where one of the paras is working in discrete trial with a student. There's an independent workstation with the little guy in blue at the back. I've got a small group going at the horseshoe table, another student doing independent work at the green station over on the right side. And then there towards the front of the room near the camera, there's another one-on-one teaching area. So what I would like you to get from this is that you must have defined spaces. It's really difficult to teach in a big open space. You can use rugs, tables, bookshelves, dividers, other furniture. You can see these outdoor storage benches that I found and purchase for my classroom. So whatever you have, whatever's available to you, whatever you can reasonably get, and you can use to define the areas of your classroom. By this time, I've learned a few things from the previous room. Things were going much more smoothly. I was not chasing students around this room, and teaching and learning were happening. Okay, so there are some things that we need to think about before we set up the zones in the room. So these are some things that you'll want to think about and gather some information before you get started. How many students and staff are going to be in the room? It's a really important consideration. What furniture is available? Often teachers are given a classroom with some furniture and materials in it, and they just need to make the most of it. Like that, what you get is what you get, right? But it's also important to know which things you might be able to influence. Like, is there a storage closet in your building where you could maybe go find some different furniture that might suit your needs better? Sometimes there is, and that it doesn't hurt to ask. But it's also important to know like which of those things is out of your control. Are you stuck with this furniture and you just have to make it work? Okay. Do you have a choice in your classroom? Often you don't. You're just given a classroom and that's what you've got. So just thinking through some of those things. Do you have special equipment for students? Do you have students with standers or students who need a wheelchair or get around using a walker? Or there's a variety of other special equipment that you might need to consider when you're setting up your room. Then what are your storage options? Do you have storage where you can put materials away out of student reach, especially if you've got those elementary kiddos, so that you're able to stay organized? Do you need to figure out some different storage options because it's not built into the classroom? So thinking about that can be important as well. And then safety concerns. And those are things like if you have a student who's a runner, you'll want to set up your room so that an adult is stationed near the door. Maybe they teach a small group near the door so they can easily slide over and block that door when needed. And then, like I said, students who have mobility concerns and get around the classroom in a different way, you'll need to consider their needs. Maybe students who are blind or have low vision, you'll need to consider furniture placement for them as well. So the really important thing here is to consider your students' individual needs. You'll need to look at your student data, your IEPs, and figure out what does each student need and how can I set up my classroom for them to be successful. It's really important to look at that individual student data before you even get to the point of setting up the room. Okay, so after you have those things gathered, you can save yourself some time by thinking through how you're going to set up your classroom. You can draw it out so you have a blueprint, you have a little bit of a guide to go with. Many people find it helpful to just draw it, sketch it out on paper before they start moving furniture around. And it can be really simple, like the hand-drawn layout on the right. That's an actual classroom that one of our consultants worked in, drew the picture before they got started so that they had an idea of where the furniture could go and what they were going to do a little bit in each area. Another option is to use a digital planner. Then on the left, you can see the Kaplan floor planner. You can see the website there where you can go in and select different furniture and arrange the room that way. There are a lot of options in Google Slides or PowerPoint. You could also put shapes corresponding to the furniture that you have and move those around. So there are some options. Others of us do not have very strong visual spatial skills, and we can't envision what it's going to look like or how things are going to fit. So we prefer to actually move the furniture around and use a trial and error process. I will tell you, that was usually my process, and I know that it took longer than it did for someone who was able to draw it out ahead of time. So being able to draw it out a little bit ahead of time really will save you some time in the long run. All right, so now that you know what zones are and you've thought a little bit about your classroom, here are the zones and areas that we suggest that should be incorporated into a self-contained classroom. If you don't have a self-contained classroom, maybe you're a resource teacher. It's okay. Some of these things are still going to apply to you and may be useful as you think about setting up your room as well. But just keep in mind that for the most part, this training was designed specifically for self-contained teachers. Might be a resource teacher who has some kiddos coming in and out. Maybe they have a few self-contained teachers or students, but just keep that in mind as we go through. So the suggested zones are a teacher space, a whole group area, a one-on-one instruction area, small group, independent work, student schedules, and student space. And we'll talk about what that is here in a little bit. So we're going to go through each area now. Okay, for the teacher space, this is where you're going to do your planning, your computer work, organize your personal materials that students shouldn't have access to, and store student records. That's an important piece of this. But remember that your teacher area is mostly going to be used during your scheduled prep time and after school hours. Considering that it won't take up the majority of your school day, it shouldn't take up the majority of the space in your classroom either. That's valuable real estate for students. So just want to keep that in mind as you set up your teacher space. These teachers in these examples have found out a way to carve out some space while leaving the majority of room for students. So I just want to point out a few things. In the picture on the right, the top right, that teacher area, it looks like she's using a horseshoe table, which might be multi-purpose. She probably also uses that to teach small groups at, but that's her teacher space. So she's got that counter behind her desk or her table, and then you can see a lock on that cabinet. That's perfect for storing student records. So keep that in mind as you set up your teacher space. Where is your locked cabinet, whether it's a file cabinet or a built-in cabinet like this, where you're going to store confidential student records like your IEPs, your evals, your student data? Where is that going to be kept? Then you can see another example on the top left is a teacher who's also using a horseshoe table and kind of has back in the corner has their area. They've got a bookshelf with some of their materials. That's an area where they can sit and do computer work once the students are gone from the room, or they can teach a small group there and clear off the computer and the pencil box or whatever needs to happen there. Another example is on the bottom right. You can see another teacher who has put a desk kind of back in the corner, so they're not taking up a lot of space, but you can see some organization ideas there as well. Okay, so it's beneficial. We're going to talk about tips and tricks on each for each area. And when you're thinking about your teacher area, it's beneficial if you can see the classroom from your teacher area. So keep that in mind. Like if you are needing to work on something when you have a couple students in the room, can you see the room? And maybe if you're teaching at that desk, that table, like the examples that we saw, and maybe you're teaching a small group, but can you see the other areas of the room where students are? Don't store student materials behind your desk, because you don't want to give them an idea or a reason, or an idea, but definitely not a reason to go behind your desk and into your teacher area. Something that can be helpful for teaching students to respect teacher space, which is important. It's important to learn which areas of the classroom can I go in and which areas of the classroom are off limits to me. It's an important life skill. So using something like the red tape on the floor with stop signs can be a good visual cue to teach students that stop, that's off limits, that's the teacher space. I know my students, young students, they really enjoyed practicing that. So we'd take a reinforcer, we'd walk up to the line, stop, high five, make it fun, make it a game. And they would sometimes go stand on the red line and go, look, Mrs. Maxim, I'm stopping. And so then you can reinforce that too. Great job, I'm so proud of you. And they love to practice that. And it really did help keep them where they need. You'll need to consider where your phone hooks up. If you have a phone in your classroom, where your computer hookups are, if you're wired into the wall, which most buildings still are. So that's an important consideration with teacher space, and something that we often can't control. Often it's not ideal, but we make it work, right? So just considering that before you set up this area of your room is important. You can see on the screen a variety of organization options that teachers have used. And just a note about keeping your things organized. If you keep it organized and you have a system for things, then you don't have to carry that heavy cognitive mental load of where is everything and where is it supposed to be. If it has a place and it lives there and you're consistent about using your organization system, it will make your life so much easier. And it really does reduce that burden that you kind of carry around with you as a teacher. So you might need to get creative when you're thinking about your teacher space. The picture on the bottom right, I love this picture because they've just used a student desk. Looks like it's off in the corner by the wall. It's not a lot of space, but it's just what that teacher needs. They've really pared down their materials to be kind of just the essentials. And that you can see their teacher computer sitting there with some of their pencils and pens and things on the side, some drawers for organization. It's very much minimal as far as a teacher space goes, but they're making it work for them. So love that creativity. Let's talk about the whole group area. So this is the area where you're going to teach and share the information that's applicable to all of your students. This usually includes things like a morning meeting, a circle time. Transition could be that everybody comes back to this area for transition to and from the room. You might use it for a social skills lesson. And then maybe at dismissal, you use that time again. So this is one of those multi-purpose areas that can be used for several different things, but the key is that you're using it with your entire class. It's a whole group kind of area. The arrangement of this area is going to depend on your student needs. For example, do your elementary students need a colored spot on the floor so they know exactly where to go? Others might need to be seated in something like the benches that you can see there. I'm not saying that would work for everybody, but those benches worked really well for my classroom because there were spots for, you could usually get 3 students on a bench, and then there were a few students that were left to sit on the floor, but we could switch out. Students got pretty comfortable with finding their space, but if needed, I could switch out, and it's Johnny sat on the bench yesterday, so it's someone else's turn today. And just having a little more structure to that space, having the benches there also kept students from, like getting off the carpet and laying all over the room. It was more of like confining that space a little bit, and it worked really well. For older students, so for your high school and junior high students, they might be able to use more of a recreational leisure type area for their morning meeting or for announcements. You can see something in the middle of the screen that looks more like a traditional, like a living room setting, which is appropriate for students who are older. And then the one on the bottom right is also more of a secondary whole group area where they sit at a table, kind of like having a meeting, like if they were working in an office, kind of like a meeting of coming together in that sort of a space. They even have office chairs and some different things there. Here are some other examples. Students may need their own tables or seats. Maybe it's due to behavior that you see that would be best dealt with at a table where they have a little bit of their own space, or maybe during COVID, we need to space students out a little more. So that could be another option. I like the little lap desk that the students are using on the top right. That's another option for students. And then just thinking about how to use that whole group area. A lot of teachers use it to bring students there before they need to like wash their hands and go to lunch. Everybody comes to the whole group area. They're dismissed a couple at a time, whatever sinks are available, to go wash their hands and line up for lunch from there. Some teachers bring their students there and then they check their schedules and they all kind of disperse from that central area. So you can use that in a variety of ways. Just keep in mind that students may need many opportunities to practice and be reinforced for appropriate behavior at the whole group. It takes some time to get into a routine of the whole group being together and what the appropriate behaviors are, what you're looking for in those areas. But it can be a great place to teach some of those skills, like just learning how to sit, maybe some social skills, giving people a turn to talk, practicing the routines for transition, like I mentioned. Paras can help support and redirect. Often a para sitting behind or standing behind the student can help to prompt them or even provide reinforcement. And then things like morning meeting and announcements should be kept short and to the point. For most students, I would suggest not having any more than a 10-minute morning meeting. You can come back throughout the day and repeat that little small chunks of time to get all the information in that you want to get in. But in my opinion, it's much better to bring them back for smaller amounts of time throughout the day than it is to try to do like a 30-minute circle time where you're losing everybody, and it's not very beneficial anyway. So that's just something to think about. Don't forget that if you have paras in the room, they can support the instruction. And often it's a great position for them to be in to help with prompting, to provide students a chance to be successful. All right, so some tips and tricks for whole group area. How do you organize this area? These are just some examples. You might think about alternate seating, some things that students might find helpful at those times. They might need some support, something like a tomato seat or a desk like we talked about. And just remember to teach those expectations, those behavioral expectations of what you want to see during that time. And students may need an individual binder that paces along with the whole group lesson. And you can see a morning work binder here that would kind of follow the flow of a calendar time. So the student can do it on their own in their lap or at their desk, whatever the situation is, while the group continues. The group does it on the calendar, either on the wall or on the smart board. And every student could have their own morning work binder, that those could be individualized and scaffolded to meet your individual students' needs. And then just on the top left, keeping in mind that in your secondary classrooms, those times may look a little different, and that's okay. It's probably not going to be on a carpet like it is at elementary, but you're preparing students for life beyond high school. So it's appropriate that it looks a little bit different and maybe more like a workplace kind of setting. All right, so one-on-one instruction. In this area, you're going to work on things like IEP goals. Maybe you're doing discrete trial, dynamic learning maps, the DLM assessment. That's done individually often, so you may be working on those skills in a one-on-one area with students. You might need more than one-on-one teaching area in your room. It really depends on your staff to student ratio and the specific needs of your students. It's also possible to use an area of the room that's also used for something else as a second area for one-on-one instruction. For example, one of the consultants that I work with, Jenny, she used her snack table as a one-to-one area for discrete trial training just for part of the day. She had a couple rotations where additional students were in the classroom, and that was really the only area available. So during those small specific times of the day, her snack area became a one-on-one table for that part of the day. Okay, here are some examples of one-on-one areas. Looking at the picture on the left, this is a one-on-one area set up for discrete trial. And here are some things that you can see in the picture to keep in mind. It's important to have materials readily available. And that little rolling cabinet to the left of the adult, that was where all of the data sheets, the reinforcers, any manipulatives and materials that were needed were in that cabinet. So it was readily available. In front of the para, you can see some visual cues and support that are for staff on the wall. So visual cues are not just for our students, but sometimes they're for us as well. They're a reminder of things that we need to do, or how to, maybe it's an error correction procedure. Maybe it's something about data collection, but it's there on the wall for people to see. And then the student is seated between the adult and the wall, which gives more environmental control. So if the student is not a flight risk, you might be able to sit across the table from them, like the picture in the top right. But for young students or students who may tend to get up and leave the area, seating them between an adult and the wall is a great idea. The picture on the bottom left is an example of the alternate assessment, the DLM, being administered to a student on the computer. So you can see that that's a little one-on-one area in a computer station with the teacher and the student. So there are a variety of ways to approach your one-on-one area. And again, it really will depend on your students' needs. Here's another example. The top left picture shows another one-on-one area set up with storage examples using those portable dividers to block off the area. And that's being used for discrete trial as part of the STAR curriculum. And you can see those boxes there if you're familiar with that. In the other pictures, you can see a variety of individual students' needs addressed. Like you can see the student using a communication device, a student using noise canceling headphones and a chew necklace. So these students have the things that they need to be successful. The young man on the bottom right is using the technology that meets his individual needs. So I know I'll probably say that 100 times or more throughout this slide presentation, but just think about what each student needs is so important in setting up your classroom. And then some tips and tricks. We've already talked a little bit about setup as far as having a corner of the room works really well for a one-on-one area because you can seat the student between the adult and the wall or the divider. It does need to be an area of the room with fewer distractions. Like I wouldn't put a one-on-one area right next to the door if you can help it, or right next to the bathroom where people might be coming in and out. The rolling 3-drawer carts, which you can see on the top left, that works really well for organizing materials. in a one-on-one area and in a small group area of your room. They can also easily be moved around, which can be helpful. Dividers can be used for blocking off this area, and that's often helpful. And then don't forget that data collection is an important part of one-on-one teaching. You can organize student data in a binder for easy access during instruction. And then you can see a notebook here on the top right that's organized. Each student has a number and a color where you could quickly flip to that student's tab and collect data. So keeping those pieces, even for data collection, in the area where you're going to use it so that it's readily available for you is super important. And make sure that you would also have like your writing utensil that you need, any extra data sheets, anything that you can organize in that area to help maximize instructional time is so helpful. Small group area. So you might need 1 or 2 small group areas depending on your student population, the activities that you're going to be doing. And this can, again, look very different based on the needs of your classroom, the furniture that you have in your classroom space. But in small group, you'll address things like academics, where you're going to do the bulk of your teaching. Structured play and communication can be done in that area. You can even teach social skills in a small group area. Here are some examples of small group areas. Horseshoe tables work great for small groups. However, not every teacher has access to one, so use what you have. If you have a round table, or you have a square table, or you have a rectangle table, those can all work for small group areas as well. Here are some tips and tricks for organizing materials. Be sure that materials are organized and stored in the area where they will be used. So I don't know how often I, in my early years of teaching, would sit down at the table ready to teach math and realize that, oh man, that one thing I need is across the room, and I've got to leave this little group of students to go over there. And there's a real good chance that when I walk across the room, they're all going to get up and be in several different areas before I come back. Of course, once I've taught that behavior and I've reinforced it and students are in routines, that chance is much less likely. But at the beginning of the year, I could not afford to leave them at the table to be going and finding materials during instructional times. So having those materials prepared and in the area where they're going to be used saves so much time in the long run. Data collection is also an important part of small group instruction. So keeping your data collection system easy to access. Once again, it could be in a notebook or a binder like we talked about before, could be on clipboards like in this example. So however you choose to organize your data, do what works best for you, but keep it easy and readily accessible to you. That's the suggestion I have for tips and tricks there. And then in the bottom right, the clipboard colors correspond with the color assigned to each student. So you might, sorry, not the bottom right, in the middle, those clipboard colors, like maybe Becky is yellow. So I know that every time I take data for Becky, I'm going to go get the yellow clipboard. So some students in some classrooms, for some teachers, that works. I usually had more students than I could come up with colors. So I wasn't able to use a color coding system or wasn't creative enough to come up with a variety of colors beyond the 5 or 6 that were readily available. So it didn't work for me, but it might work for you. And that is a great organization system if it does. In the picture on the bottom right, you can see just some book boxes with student materials organized, which is another quick, easy way to do it. Independent work. So this is a station where students are going to learn a system for working on their own. They can't do it at the beginning. It's going to have to be taught. It's going to have to be reinforced. And it's something that they're going to need some support with at first. But you're going to teach them to work on their own using this system. And the things that they're working on in independent work are mastered skills. That's really important. We wouldn't give a student brand new work that they've never seen before, never encountered in an independent work, because they wouldn't be able to do it on their own. So we're working on the things that they have mastered. That's a great place to work on generalization and maintenance of those skills. And then it's individualized for each student need. There's no one right way to set up this station, right? There's a lot of different options for independent workstations, but there are some things that we can talk about that can be consistent between them as we go through. And another idea for this, you might want to start teaching the independent work routine in a small group, like maybe with 2 or 3 students. You can start teaching how to use the routine And then you can move to a more independent workstation as the student masters that routine in the small group. So with a teacher there, they've got it now. I can move them to an area of the room where they're by themselves and trust that they're going to be able to continue using that system that I've taught. All right, so like I said, there are many different ways to set it up, but there are a few things that should be included in every independent station, independent work area. So here are 3 very different examples, but you can see that there's a system for organizing the tasks. There's some storage in each of those areas. And usually it's 3 separate tasks. That's just a rule of thumb. It's a general rule of thumb. On the left in the bottom right, you can see those 3 drawer shelves labeled with the numbers 1, 2, 3. That's the task the students are going to complete first, second, and third. Those tasks would be stored. The students would pull those tasks from the drawers. In the picture on the top right, the tasks are in boxes on the shelf. So you can see on that bookshelf, there are some boxes there, and that's where they would pull their activities from. There are visual supports there available to the students to help them follow the sequence of the tasks and indicate when they've completed their work. Often the container holding the task is labeled with numbers, colors, shapes, pictures, could be characters that they enjoy, some identifying image. The student would pull off the task from the work box or the work task and put it on their visual task strip on the table. So once they've completed it, they pull it off and put it there. And then there's a finished box of some sort for student to put the tasks in that they have completed. So depending on the size of the task, the size of the finished container may need to be adjusted. For larger tasks, things like laundry baskets or those big plastic tubs work well, but smaller containers can be used for smaller tasks. And you see a smaller basket on the table on the left. They're using the shelf on the picture in the top right and the shelf on the picture on the, they're using the drawers in the picture on the bottom right. So there's a variety of ways that you can do it. It is also really important that you teach students to work from left to right, just like we learn to read. The progression that we teach a lot of things in is left to right. So teaching them that kind of a system that's organized that way can be really helpful. So it doesn't matter where you put your independent workstation, as long as the system moves left to right. And like I said, this promotes literacy. And here's some other examples of work systems. They all work. They can be individualized to meet different students' needs. The picture in the top left is there's just a divider in the middle, and there's 2 independent workstations, one on each side at those tables. And those are just those little stacking file organizers where file folder activities or paper pencil tasks, that was for students who were able to do that work independently. On the picture on the bottom left, that's another basket system or a little bucket system. Looks like it's organized by color. And you can see the task strip on the left side of the desk. And they're also on the work boxes. So students pull it off the work box, put it on the task strip when they're finished. And there's a laundry basket underneath the table that you can't see very well, but that's where they're putting their finished work. On the top right, it looks like those are 3 different independent workstations with some milk crates, and there's probably files in there where they pull out the first file and complete what's inside of it, put it back, second file. That's one way to do it. Someone also pointed out in a training something that I thought was brilliant. It could be teaching them to move from cubby 1 to cubby 2 to cubby 3 to complete the work. And that I've never seen that work in or set up like that in a classroom, but that could also be an option. And I love that. One reason why I really love that picture and that example is because it seems to be set up more like what a student might encounter in an office job once they leave school. And then the picture on the bottom right, there's a shelf to the left where the activities are stored, and they have the desk where they work, and that pink milk crate on the right where they put the finished items when they're done. All right, so I want to give you a little bit of encouragement. This seems like a big task, but it is possible. The little guy on the left is a student that I had several years ago. He came to school with a lot of aggression, some refusal, and a history of being sent home from his previous school. About 4 months after he joined the classroom, he was able to sit and work independently for short periods of time. It took some time. This was 4 months after he started in the classroom, but he was able to sit and complete simple file folder tasks and some other mastered skills by himself at the table for brief periods of time. The student on the right, that student's using their independent time for a computer program. And I also want to point out that he's using a touch screen. So it's been individualized for his needs. You could use that independent time for something like Teachtown, for Dreambox, for Lexia. And there are some other programs that I know you all use throughout Arkansas. There's various programs that teachers use, and you might be able to have a student work on that during their independent time if they're able to do that on their own. It's okay to think outside of the box a little bit with your independent time. What can you come up with? What creative ideas can you have? And once again, it's just important to have materials organized and ready to go, loaded into the system when the day starts so that students can begin to work as soon as they get there, so that they're not waiting for someone to set up their tasks. These pictures show a couple of organization systems that teachers use when they have students working at multiple levels. Honestly, that left picture kind of freaks me out a little bit. That's a lot going on. There looks like there's some that are organized by shapes, some by letters, and some by numbers. And I'm sure that's because they have students at 3 different levels. And so they have tasks prepared for all 3 levels, which is fantastic. And I'm impressed that they have this many tasks ready to go. Those are sometimes referred to as shoebox tasks or task boxes, and they have them ready to go for the day or maybe for the week. And then on the right, that's just a very simple system using some book boxes where you would have, that's also 3 different levels. There were file folder activities at 3 different levels, so it can be quickly set up. Paraprofessionals can be taught the system for setting up the work area, putting the right level of activity in that area, and then they can help with that. Don't forget that to begin with, an adult will need to be available to teach the system. Students don't just know how to use an independent station when they sit down there. We have to teach it. So sometimes this is an area where a para can monitor a couple different independent stations at the beginning and teach that. Or once again, you might be able to teach it in a small group. You can teach it in a small group and then transition students to the independent area, which frees up some space in your schedule once students are able to work independently and they're not requiring an adult supervision for everything. All right, so we're going to talk about student space. So every student needs a space to call their own. In a self-contained classroom, this is even more important when we start talking about functional routines. It's also an area that you can often use for student schedules, or it has the potential to be used to store the student schedule, kind of a home base for students. They can store their materials there, they can keep their items from home there, and they can sometimes check their schedule there as well. Just like we as adults like to have an area to put our personal materials when we come to work every day, students need a space to put theirs. So this is going to look different in every classroom. Not every classroom is set up the same. Not every classroom comes with built-in cubbies. So we have to get creative sometime. It could be a cubby where a student stores their backpack or their lunchbox. If you're lucky enough to have built-in cubbies, it might be that simple. For some of you, I know that you do not have built-in cubbies and you've had to, like I said, get a little more creative. It might be an individual desk where the student's schedule is at their desk. They store their pencil box and other materials inside. However, many of our self-contained classrooms don't have a desk for each student. And in some cases, that's not even appropriate or necessary. So that might not work. In some cases, it may work. It might be the case that individual students need a more structured area in addition to their cubby or just a storage area, and other students might not need that area. So maybe you have a student who does have a desk that's theirs because sometimes they just need a little more structure and others may not. So you can adjust that based on your students' needs. The picture on the far left, I really like because it's just one of those science fair boards. And they've put the things the student needs. She's got her schedule. She's got pencils and dry erase marker there on the left. You can see she has a calendar for things that are coming up. She has her computer where she's working. And during COVID, that could even work like in a home environment. If hopefully we're past that point, but we might not be. If students are sent home to work, they could have that even at a kitchen table to divide that space and give it a little more structure. for some students. If you have students who you're teaching who are virtual, who are at home this year, and that might be a good option if parents are struggling for like, I have to use a kitchen table for school. Even just setting up that board can, or that little divider can help to students to know like, okay, when this is on the table, it's work time, it's school time. When it's not on the table, then I do the things I normally do on my kitchen table at home. I eat there, maybe I play a game there, whatever it is. And it's important that staff have a spot too. I don't have a picture for this, but I just want to point out, it's really important that staff have a place to store their lunchbox, their bag, their jacket, their purse, their whatever it is that you have that you bring to school in a place that's inaccessible to students, right? So the students can't get into it. So sometimes it can be a cabinet, sometimes it's behind the teacher area, wherever that is in your room, just making sure that we have thought about that as well. Okay, so I've already said this, but use what you have. Not all classrooms are going to have lockers or cubbies. Plastic bins are a great alternative. You can see an example of that. And in this example, they're using those cube shelves to put the plastic bin on. But I've also seen teachers use those milk crates and turn them up on their side so that the open part is facing out. And then you can zip tie those. You can see the other example, the schedule on the desk is just indicating that a student could have a desk that's their kind of home base area with their schedule. They would come back to that when they need to check their schedule. And if you have older students, it might be a locker if it's a junior high or high school. And keep in mind, what do their peers use? Especially when you're talking about older students who are, maybe they're in the hallway with their peers more. If they can use a locker, if that's available to them and it's something that they can access, think about what those same age peers are using and how to help them access the same things. So we might have to get a little more creative. Maybe a combination lock isn't going to work for them, but what else can we do to modify that and be taught to use the same kind of storage system that others are using? Okay, so student schedule location. We talked a little bit about using their student area as a student schedule location. It does matter. So students need enough space to use their schedule without being crowded by other students. And this will help you avoid some of that fighting and that kind of bumping and pushing that might happen if you've got student schedules really close together. So there are many possible schedule types. We're not going to talk too much about the different types of schedules. We'll be real brief here. We do have a student schedule training that addresses that, and that will be coming up later in the year. So keep an eye out for that. But we can talk more in depth there about the different types of schedules. They need to be easily located and they need to be accessible for students. So if a student is in a wheelchair, for example, can they reach their schedule? Can they reach their whole schedule? Can they get to the top of it to take off the things that are at the top? Are they having to bend over or lean over in ways that are uncomfortable to reach their schedule? So just thinking about those things when we're talking about accessible. For small students, we wouldn't want the schedule clear up on the wall where they can't reach it, right? So just putting them where they can. Everyone doesn't need to have the same schedule. That's important. So you could have students on a variety of different schedules, and all schedules don't have to be in the same location. So that's another thing to think about when you're thinking about where am I going to put these schedules. So here is just a real brief description of some different types of schedules. The far left shows the schedule located on the student's desk. That one has a little indicator, a little clothespin that the student moves down. It could also be kind of schedule where they pull off the Velcro icon, but they've moved a step up from that in this example, and they're moving the clothespin down the schedule or the task strip. That middle picture shows more of, it's still a Velcro schedule. They're moving from a to-do column to a finish column, but it's in the binder. So if that student is moving between classrooms with their general education peers, carrying a binder is appropriate, is age appropriate. So that's a good thing to consider. And then the far right is just an example of a dry erase, mark it off with a dry erase marker kind of schedule. And that was stationary on a student's cubby actually, but it could be on the wall. Could be that they take the clipboard around with them. This was a schedule that I actually used in my classroom, and my hope was that by Velcroing it to the student's cubby and teaching him to use it there, then eventually we could have him moving around the room with it. But he just wasn't ready for that yet. It was a lot to keep up with. So we were kind of transitioning and moving in that direction. Consider students, especially as they move into secondary from, into junior high, into high school, they might need to move to a different schedule that increases their independence. And a schedule is one way to do that, to help increase their independence. And think about age, things that are age respective. Most students at that level are carrying a phone, or they have a planner that every student in the school uses. So what can we do with the materials that other students use that are already available to them to help them stay organized? Maybe it is that planner or that agenda kind of thing where they carry with them, or maybe it's their phone. Maybe we teach them how to use a schedule on their phone to stay organized. Okay, so here are a few tips and tricks, and you can just see a couple examples here. Don't put visual schedules right next to the bathroom door or a classroom exit or another super distracting area that students might get off track when they go to check their schedule. Especially if you have a runner, don't put his schedule anywhere near the door, right? Because that's just asking for giving him an opportunity to leave the room. Separate schedules enough that students can easily get to them. So once again, so they're not jostling and pushing each other to get there. Decide how you're going to handle the Velcro icon. Will they put them in a bucket next to their schedule? And this is the picture on the far left, that there's a kind of a box at the bottom of that schedule where the icons go in. Or will they have a landing strip and they tag in at each station, like the picture in the middle? Will they take that icon and go tag in at the red station when they get there? So that's an important thing to think about when you're thinking about setting up your classroom. And then just consider organization when it comes to student schedules, especially the little Velcro icons. How are you going to store them? Here's one example, tackle box, kind of jewelry box. There's those clear boxes that have lots of little dividers inside that you can often put pictures. That works really well. So we could talk for another hour about visual schedules. In fact, we have a training that does that. We have a visual supports training as well that dives deeper into this area, and one on student schedules. So go check out our website if you're interested in learning more about those. All right, so some optional zones that are definitely not required, not appropriate for every grade level or every classroom, but just considering the needs of your students in your room. You might have an area for crafts, snack, and cooking. You might have an area to teach functional skills, and you may need an area for recreation and leisure activities. So thinking about crafts, snack, and cooking. If you have the space, most self-contained teachers find it helpful to have a multi-purpose area for these things. And it's also really helpful if it can be near a sink and on the tile flooring. Sometimes that's not possible. I've had to have a craft, snack, and cooking area that was near a sink, but on carpet, because that's what my classroom had. And sometimes the little tile area right in front of the sink is definitely just a little small area, definitely not big enough for a table to be considered a whole area. So you might need to think about those things a little bit and use what you have. Snack, crafts, and cooking we talked about could be used for those art activities, science experiments, group snack times, those kinds of things can be done in this area. And don't forget that those activities are all great for practicing and working on communication and social skills. So some teachers don't really want to mess with that. It seems like something that isn't necessary in their classroom, and it may not be, your students. But just thinking, especially when you're talking about elementary students, but it can be helpful for older students too. Sitting down and eating a snack together or sitting down and doing a craft together can be a great time for students to use their communication skills to ask for items. So to make requests, even to appropriately respond with a no, do you want goldfish? No, thanks. That's an appropriate skill to learn. And to wait their turn. It can also be great because students can help with cleaning up that area. They can help with washing the dishes. Of course, with cooking, they can help with a lot of different things. And so it's a great way to incorporate some functional routines into the day as well. So here are some examples of classrooms that have used this area. The top left shows a multi-purpose area. You can see a small fridge and a microwave on the counter and the sink. The cabinets were used for storing art supplies, silverware, napkins, placemats in the drawers for students for snack time. So that's one example. And then you can see the picture on the right is a kitchen area in a high school classroom. This is actually taken in a classroom here in Arkansas. So this was an example of an area that high schoolers could go into and practice their skills in a home type setting, in a very authentic setting, in a way that they would be able to use them for life. So my tips and tricks for this area are to label all the things. Just like with other areas, keep the items that you will need in that area, store them nearby, ready to go. And keep in mind that many arts, crafts, and food items will be things that you don't want students to have unlimited access to. So how can you store them in a way that won't encourage students to be getting into them throughout the day? Cabinets up on top, and sometimes you can use like child safety locks where it just takes a little longer, not locks, but little clips that take a little longer to get into. That can be helpful. So just having things ready to go is my biggest tip for that area also. So functional skills. So when we start talking about functional skills, this covers a really wide range of things, right? It can cover many tasks. It could be teaching a child to use the restroom, to wash their hands, to dress themselves. Those are things that promote student dignity. It could be things to work on for safety awareness. It could include finding a recipe, shopping for needed items, preparing a meal, eating, maybe using utensils, cleaning up after the meal. Functional skills are any of those skills that will increase independence and allow a student to function as independently as possible. And clearly, this won't be the same for all students, but these routines can be individualized to meet your students' needs. So depending on the skill you're addressing, you likely need to use different areas of the classroom. In these examples, the students have gone shopping, they've purchased the needed supplies, they're maybe practicing putting them away. Some of them are folding some laundry, getting some practice with there. The one on the bottom left, he's using visual supports to make a sandwich. So all of those skills will support student independence in the future. Here are some other examples of skills that can foster independence. Washing the dishes is a great skill for students to learn. Sweeping the floor, they can help clean up. It's a great thing for students to learn as well. Counting money, and it looks like they're selling like maybe a little coffee shop kind of thing. So those skills can help students now and in the future, and the classroom kitchen is a great area to learn those skills in. And be sure to use visuals to support the completion of functional routines. So an example is showing a child where to sit, and the bottom right has an example of that with those placemats. Students decorated those placemats at the beginning of the year. They took turns putting the placemats out at snack time, so they weren't always sitting in the same spot. They needed to find their spot with their name and their decorated placemat, and it told them where to go, showed them where to go. Using visuals, like for example, in the picture on the top right in the restroom, using visuals that show students the sequence of the task and reminding them to flush the toilet. And then we need to be sure that students can do their new functional skills across time, settings, people, and with different materials and equipment than they're used to. So if you've taught this skill at school and the student has mastered it, one thing you can do is take a video of the student doing that task and send it home. You can even send a data sheet with it and ask parents to have them do it at home in their home environment. And now that's a type of homework. And it's being done across people, time, settings, and material and equipment. That's the gold standard for generalization. Can they do it, in a different setting, with different time, people, materials, and equipment? All right, recreation and leisure skills. You might not need or have a separate area of the classroom for this, but one simple suggestion is just to take a tablecloth and put it over a group table to change the purpose of the table. So it's normally a small group instruction for academic skills. When I put the tablecloth on it, now it's our recreation and leisure area, and that's where we come to play a game or whatever it is that you're working on. So we can teach necessary skills here. We can expose students to a variety of activities. Sometimes our students don't like to try new things. So we can give them a chance to try a variety of things. Maybe they'll find something new that they enjoy. And this is structured. I just want to point out that it's not just kind of a free-for-all free time. It's a structured, intentional kind of recreation and leisure. For many of our students, those skills don't develop naturally. They don't just have those skills. So we have to explicitly teach them just like we do everything else. So providing a structured time and place to teach the skills that students need to work on can be done in this area. Leisure is subjective. So I want to point that out too. What is relaxing or enjoyable to me might not be something that you'd want to spend your time doing. And this is true for our students too. They often find enjoyment in things that we as adults wouldn't consider to be enjoyable. But that's what they like to do. And so how can we help them engage in some leisure activities, maybe broaden their scope of leisure activities, maybe learn to do something that someone else wants to do, like a friend wants to do, because they enjoy being together. So can I try the thing that you enjoy doing today? Maybe I don't really like to put puzzles together, but I can do that with a friend because it's a skill that I can learn for life. So some students like to play games or put puzzles together. Others might enjoy time just to sit and read a book or relax and be left to their own thoughts. Sometimes that is recreation and leisure. As I get older and as my kids have gotten older, I have 3 teenagers in my house now. And so sometimes me just sitting and doing nothing is the thing that I really enjoy doing because there isn't a lot of quiet downtime. But just considering every individual and what they may enjoy doing and may not enjoy doing. And it's okay to try things that we do not enjoy sometimes, but also providing an opportunity for things that we do enjoy and that can be lifelong skills. So that's another thing to think about with these kinds of activities. What can be a recreation and leisure activity that they could maybe enjoy for life? So some tips and tricks. Label those storage areas, whether it's bins or shelves, whatever it is, for recreational materials so that students can easily see where they need to be put back when they're finished. So if you've got a game shelf, make sure that they're putting things back where they go, it's organized, and that's another skill that we can teach them in this area and this time. Learning to play a game together or learning to be part of a team can really reinforce some important life skills. Like we can even practice turn taking, waiting, communication, losing and winning appropriately. So good sportsmanship. Those things can all be practiced in this kind of a setting, the structured recreation and leisure. And we want to provide multiple exposures for new activities. Don't give up too soon. Just because they didn't fall in love with it the first time doesn't mean they won't enjoy it over time. So keep trying little by little. If a student's unsuccessful with an activity, we may need to break it down and do a task analysis and break it down into the smaller tasks, the smaller skills that they need. And then we can see what skills are they missing? What do we need to teach? And think about activities their same age peers enjoy. For example, teenagers, this little girl in the middle, she's not a teenager, but all kids love to listen to music. A lot of kids from a variety of ages, people from a variety of ages enjoy listening to music. So that's a skill that is age appropriate that could carry through life. I love the example of this group of people playing ping pong because that's something, again, that's another skill that if a student learns to do that, that's something that they could do throughout their life. And then, of course, playing a game at the table, like the big group there, I'm sure they're working on a wide variety of skills. It looks like they have multiple adults working with the student so they can really model those appropriate turn taking and game playing skills. That's really important that they have good models for those things too. And then on the bottom right, you can see the 2 young ladies enjoying listening to music together, which is definitely something that a lot of students will find enjoyable. Do you remember this picture? So we've covered each of these suggested zones today and a few more like the teacher space, the student space, and the student schedule location. You can't see them in this picture, but they were in this classroom. And they are very important, all those smaller areas of the classroom, like making sure I've got a teacher space for students to put their things, and a space for their schedules. Might seem small, but it's an important consideration before you get started. So just to remind you, this is one example. You may not have all of these areas in your classroom. You may not need more than one one-on-one area. You may need 3 one-on-one work areas. It's very adjustable and dependent on your students and your classroom needs. And then teaching expectations. This is one of the most important parts of this whole training. You want to teach how to use these areas and what behavior you expect and do not expect in those areas. So you're going to use visual supports to teach them. You're going to practice. So like I said about students practicing walking up to that line and stopping. Maybe it's the stop sign on the door that they practice walking up to and stopping. Maybe it's just they practice getting up and checking their schedule and going to the next place. There are so many things we've talked about today that students can practice and will need to practice. How to use putting things back where they belong, that independent workstation, where to find the materials that they need for their activity. All those things are things that they will need to be taught and will need practice and will need positive reinforcement for. So one important tip for getting students these skills quickly is not only practice, but positive reinforcement. If we teach them how to do it and then we positively reinforce when they do it, it's much more likely that they'll continue that behavior. One thing to keep in mind too is that you'll need to You'll need to revisit those routines and procedures after breaks. So even if you have a 3-day weekend, you may need to come back in and kind of review some of those routines and procedures in your classroom. Definitely after like Thanksgiving, after Christmas, those long spring break, those longer breaks, our students need you to come back in, reteach those expectations, practice them a little more, get them kind of back into the swing of things. And it doesn't usually take quite as long after the breaks if you've really taught them at the beginning, but they do need some time to kind of readjust. In the pandemic, you might find yourself needing to revisit that if a student or students or the whole class is out for a quarantine. When they come back, you might spend a little more time teaching those skills again and reinforcing that. You will not regret the time that you spend teaching how to use this space that you've carefully created. So you're spending a lot of time, even today, just listening to me talk and sharing with you. And then thinking about your classroom setup and actually setting up your classroom and organizing your materials. So you're spending a lot of time to kind of create this space for your class. And you won't regret the time that you spend on that or the time that you spend teaching them how to use the space. It will pay off in the long run. Trust me when I say that putting those systems in place will give your classroom a level of structure that students need. It lets them know what's expected, how they're to behave in those spaces. And not only will students thrive with that level of structure, but so will yourself and any other staff members that you have in the classroom. All right, so when you implemented these ideas, it's going to be important to pause, take some time to reflect, think about what's working, what isn't, where are some areas of the classroom that aren't working the way you'd hoped. Sometimes we try something and it doesn't work, and that's okay. That's a good, we've tried it. Now we can regroup and think about something else and then change. So after you've reflected on what's working and what's not, change the things you need to change. Come back to these slides if it's helpful. Remind yourself of what your goal is for classroom setup and organization, and really be intentional about those changes you make. Really think about, why am I doing this and what am I hoping to get out of it? Setting up your classroom in a way that meets your students' individual needs, creating those systems for organization that provide structure, routine, and predictability for students and staff are well worth the time it takes. And don't forget, our overall goal is to maximize learning and avoid wasted instructional time. So thinking about these things ahead of time will help you do just that.